Okay, so this tutorial is going to show how to use several different tools. One is the clone stamp. Another is the spot healing brush. And we're also going to be looking at the Liquify filter. So this is the image as it stands, sort of a really bad portrait. So some of these tools can be used not only for portrait repair like this, but also for anything else. So basically, once you understand how these tools work, you should be able to apply what you know about them to do other things and sort of with other examples and other situations. So as you can see, this is a very poor quality portrait. And it's basically, torn and ripped and bent, and the photo includes like this white space around the outer edge. This is what we want to do to it. So, this is not 100% perfect, but you can tell there's a huge difference between this and this. And this was done just, in a few minutes using some of these tools. Then we're going to push it a little further and have a little fun with the face to do something like this, which is just a new layer here that has been modified with the Liquify filter in Photoshop. So let's get started. This is the portrait.jpg. It is in the folder called let me look real quickly. It's in a folder in Course Tools called Photoshop Spot Healing Liquify. And the first thing we're going to do is crop it. So this outer edge here, we could try to fill that in with maybe the clone stamp, which you'll understand here in a few minutes. But that's where the photo ended. So we don't, there really is nothing there to really fill in. So the crop, to crop your image, you're going to basically use your crop tool, which is right here. And once you click on it, you get this sort of box around the outer edge, and then you can drag any of these corners to your desired location, and you can just crop it from there. If you notice, it's also giving you the rule of thirds here, so it's kind of breaking it up into 9 equal boxes divided into 3 columns and 3 rows, so that if you are cropping your image to begin with, and there's a horizon line or there's something that you want to focus on, you want to put the horizon lines, any kind of horizontal lines, you'll generally want it to be close to this line or this line. Anything vertical, you want it to be close to one of these 2 lines. And generally speaking, anything you want us to be the focal point, you want the viewer to focus on, should probably be near one of these corners, where intersections where these lines meet, which is why this pops up when you go to the crop tool. It's sort of like something that you should be paying attention to. Either way, that's not, this image, I would say, the focus is on the child's face, but it's kind of centered, and that's generally how portraits are done. So we're not going to try to we're not going to redo the composition or anything of this photograph. I'm just going to hit the check mark at the top, and that gets us to the next step. The next thing we're going to do is an auto contrast, which is something I've talked about in other videos and other photos. The reason we didn't do auto contrast first is that Photoshop, when you do auto contrast, is analyzing the whole photograph, and it's using all of the pixels in that photograph to determine how to contrast your image. So it's best to do that after you crop your image. So if you do the auto contrast first, it might take into account some of the areas of the image that you are not going to be using later, and therefore it might not be the most accurate result. So basically, you always want to you crop your image first, and then I'm going to go to image and auto contrast. And again, that was a pretty faded photo, so now it brought up a lot of those darker areas that just needed to be enhanced. And the tool we're going to use mostly to get rid of all of these cracks and these rips and all these blemishes is called the spot healing brush. And it looks like a little Band-Aid. And the spot healing brush is a brush, as the name implies, which means you do get to choose the size and the hardness. So how large do you want the brush to be, and how hard do you want the edge to be? When we are trying to do this kind of blending, this sort of like repair on an image, let's say you have just spots or lines or anything that you want to get rid of in your image, we always want a fairly soft edge, because if we don't have a soft edge, you might actually see the edge of your brush when we do some of these techniques or use some of these tools. So I have basically, I have it set around 50% hardness or so. The size, we want it to be just a little bit bigger than the area we are trying to heal. So I have my brush set at about 28 pixels. And if this doesn't work, you might have to just change the size of your brush depending on the application you're trying to, you're trying to use this. But basically, I'm just going to kind of drag along, and I'm coloring over the area that I want to heal. And it shows you a black line that's just temporary, so you can kind of tell where you have been, where the brush has been. And it takes just a second for it to fill in. But what it's doing is it's using what's called content aware, which is, it says right up at the top, to fill in what Photoshop thinks you want filled in the inside of your brush. So it's looking at the pixels inside of your brush, and it's analyzing what is probably different about the inside of the brush compared to the surrounding area, and it just fills that in for you. So you can do this in kind of long strokes. You could do it in short little dots. Like here, I'm just kind of getting rid of some of these little areas with just a click of my mouse. Or again, you can kind of color over large areas, maybe like this, to see what happens. Generally speaking, the larger area you try to cover all at once, the less likely the brush is going to work properly. So it's best to do kind of small little strokes of your brush. You can even go along the outside, and it should fill in that white part. Again, if it doesn't, you might need to go back and do a little bit more. Sometimes the spot healing brush requires you to make several passes, I guess. So I'm just kind of coming along here and trying to get rid of these things to the best of my ability. And we're also going to kind of do... generally, I like to do sort of the big areas all zoomed out first, and then we might need to zoom in to do like along her cheek. This line here is much smaller and thinner. It's going to require a much smaller brush size, and therefore I'm going to want to be zoomed in when I do that. So I'm just kind of going along here and hitting as much of this area as I can. It's not doing too bad of a job, as you can tell. A little time consuming, but very quickly we start to end up, we end up with an image that is just a lot better than it used to be. So I'm going to come along here on this. Maybe I missed that line a little bit, so I'm going to hit it again, and so on. And so you can see that it, you get pretty intense and significant results very quickly. All right, so I'm not gonna spend all of the time in all these little nooks and crannies of the image, like I did in the example that you saw at the beginning here. But let me zoom in and look at the face. Now when I'm zooming in, I can see that there's more areas here that I missed. So this is why it's a really good idea to kind of do a pass over the image zoomed out, and then really zoom in and make sure you know it looks like you want it to look as you get closer. So again, these cracks much thinner than the others. So I'm going to reduce the size of my brush fairly significantly. Again, I want that crack to just fit inside my brush. The larger the brush is, the more area inside of the brush, and it's possible that it's not going to get the result that you want. So I'm just going to kind of come in here and do this in little increments along the ear. And again, you can see it's not taking too long, really, to go through this image and do what we need to do. The spot healing brush can also be used to sort of remove other things. So I just found this image online, and if we wanted to remove these cables or whatever these are going across these wires, we could do that very easily with the spot healing brush too. Again, I'm going to have my brush be just slightly bigger than the line here, and I can just kind of click and drag along it, trying to keep it as close, as centered in my brush as possible. You might see a little leftover line, and therefore you just go over it again. But I mean, this is pretty amazing. You can remove telephone lines or wires from like an outdoor photograph. You can pretty much remove anything that you need to remove from from a photograph or any image, and it does a pretty good job. Again, it's not perfect. You don't get it just with one swipe every time. Sometimes you'll need to do more than one. And again, sometimes like I'm going to try to get across this whole thing. It looks like I missed some there. I'm going to try to do a long line and see how accurate that is. Pretty good. I mean, look at that. So anyway, it's the spot healing brush. Very smart tool. It works really well. This is one of those tools in Photoshop that just keeps getting better and better and more accurate every time they update the brush in Photoshop. So older versions didn't work quite as easily or quite as quickly, and you kind of had to go back and do a lot of cleanup, but that's not too bad considering our image, looked like this, or this image looked like this just a minute ago. So the next thing here is this big chunk down here. And yeah, I could get in there with some spot healing like all through here and get rid of some of these lines. But what happens when we get down to this large area? If I try to increase the size of my spot healing brush to sort of cover this entire area, it's probably not going to do what I want it to do. It's actually not too bad. But it's a little blurry. It's a little wonky. What if we want to kind of paint over this area with what's called the clone stamp tool? And this is a tool that is also going to be in a different explored in a different video. But what the clone stamp does is it allows you to sample pixels from part of your image and paste those pixels somewhere else, but using a brush instead of trying to make a selection with marching ants or some other way. The clone stamp looks just like a stamp. It's right here. The clone stamp is also, because it is a brush, it does have a size and a hardness. I'm going to have this fairly large here. For this example, I want to take some of this area and sort of clone it over, and maybe some of this up here and clone it. So what I'm going to do is I have about an 84 pixel brush. I have a fairly soft edge to it, 40% hardness. and I have the opacity at 100%. Unlike the other version, the other example that I'm showing you with the clone stamp in the tutorial with the hand, where we want to do some nice blending between the hand and the fingers. This we want to just copy and paste these pixels 100% over to this area, which is why we want the opacity to be at 100%. We want it to basically just cover the area at once without us having to kind of add and add and add sort of more information. Now, when you have the clone stamp, if you hold the Option button on your keyboard, it's going to turn into a little target, and it's going to say, hey, which area do you want to clone from? So I'm going to click somewhere like here. I'm just going to hold the Option button down, and I'm just clicking one time with my mouse. I'm going to let my finger off the Option button, and now that area that I clicked in is following my clone stamp. It's following it right from here where I clicked it. Now I can move over, and I can start to clone just by holding my mouse button down and coloring. And also, as you're doing this, notice where the little plus symbol is. That plus symbol is showing you where in the image the cloning is originating. It doesn't stay where I Option clicked. That's just the starting point. And then basically, however far away you move your brush from that point, and in whatever direction you move your brush from that point, once you start to click and drag and start to clone, that area that you clicked on to as your source is going to move along with your brush. So very often you're not just cloning from one spot. You might clone from one area. Now I might clone from up here and sort of color down. Maybe I'll come up here again and Option click and finish this line as I go down here. And then I can kind of come over here and do this, and then maybe some over here. And basically, what I'm trying to do here is to blend this as best as I can, given what the tool is. So this did a pretty good job. I could probably clean this up, some more with the spot healing brush. And again, this is a pretty big brush, which is probably why it's kind of acting a little wonky. But I can kind of come up and clear out some of this stuff here. So again, spot healing, the clone stamp, 2 brushes that can be used not only for practical purposes like this, but also sort of more creatively as well. So how are we going to now do this, where we're going to have this face all kind of morphed like this? Well, this is a filter that's built into Photoshop that is really set up to do faces, it seems, but it can be used on any layer and any kind of image that you choose. The first thing is we're going to want the face on its own layer. The face, the forehead, and the ears, but really not the hair or the neck or anything else. Just the area that we wish to kind of push and pull. You'll see here in a second why we wouldn't want the hair or the neck or anything in this as part of our layer, of our new layer we're going to create here. So we're going to just use a spot healing brush. We're going to use the quick selection tool, not the spot healing brush. The quick selection tool, which I've gone over in the surreal landscape tutorial. We're just going to kind of click around, and it might do this. It probably will, where it's going to select too much. But that's where you hold Option, and you can color out the areas that you don't want to have selected. And it might jump back and forth a little bit. There's not a lot of contrast defining the edge of the ear there, for instance. So Photoshop might take a second to really get what you want. But if you hold Option, you can color out the things in the areas that you want to remove from your selection or your marching ants. So like everything else that we've selected in this class, we should really do select and mask. That's going to soften our edges a little bit. I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to copy and paste that. So now I have this new layer that is just the face, which I'm going to name face. Oops. And that new layer is going to be on top of the background. So it's just kind of floating by itself. So the Liquify basically is a filter. You have to make sure that you have your face layer selected, or whichever layer you want to liquify. And we're just going to go to Filter, Liquify. It's right down here. So we're going into the Filter menu, and then we're choosing Liquify from there. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Right away, and I said that Liquify is set up to do faces. There's all kinds of stuff that you can see along the right here. It recognizes there's a face, and this is called now Face Aware Liquify. You can even do things like go into the Eyes menu, and you can change the size of the eyes. The left eye and the right eye. Like, it knows which one is which. You can change the height of the eye, the width of the eye, even the distance between the eyes. So again, it's set up to just kind of work with faces pretty quickly. Same with the nose. You can change the height of the nose, the width of the nose. You can choose the shape of the mouth. You can make them smile or frown. I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. Built right into the Face Aware Liquify. However, I achieved the image that was at the beginning here from these other tools along the left. So there's a tool at the top called Forward Warp. The Forward Warp is a brush. So when you choose any of these brushes along the left, or these tools, there's the brush size and density and pressure over here. So you can change, the size of your brush, the density, basically how much it's going to affect what you're doing. But I'm just going to leave it at whatever the default is and just kind of put some horns here. And again, it liquefies the pixels and allows you to push and pull these pixels in whichever direction you want to push and pull them. Now, the higher quality your image is, the better. This is working based on pixels. Therefore, the more pixels you have in your image, the better it's going to work. The fewer pixels you have, you might start to notice where it gets a little blurry or just looks kind of odd. So again, we always want to source the best quality images that we can. So the Forward Warp does that. We also have, and I can do something like this. Now, yeah, we could make a smile with the parameters on the right, but we can't really do something this extreme. But with a Forward Warp, we can. Again, really creepy. There's also there are lots of other tools you can experiment with. The pucker and bloat tools are kind of interesting. The pucker tool will pucker things in. It'll kind of shrink things. And the bloat tool will expand things, which is what I used in the example here. And I kind of screwed that eye up a little bit. But basically, you just have to pay attention to where your brush is. And that's it. You can mess around with this. If you don't like it, you can hit cancel. If you like it, you can hit OK. And now your image is changed. But again, it's only changed on the layer that was selected. So the background is still unaltered. And again, the reason we didn't want the hair or the neck is that if we were to have had the hair on that layer, the hair would have gotten warped as well, and it wouldn't look right. We want to only liquefy if we're using this type of filter. We only want it to affect, if we only want it to affect one part of our image, we just have to make sure that only that part of the image exists on the layer that we liquefy. And there we go. So we went from, again, this very, very basic image of, where am I here? Sorry. I'm trying to revert this to show you what it looked like before. All right, well, it's not letting me revert it for whatever reason, but we did go from, that very torn up, pretty, low quality, beat up image to something like this, and then to something like that after we did the Liquify filter. So again, clone stamping, spot healing brush, Liquify, all not only practical, have practical uses, but can be interesting and to use in a more creative way as well.